On a freezing rainy day, my son threw me out of the house for being late with his meal. When my body went numb from the cold, a taxi driver helped me. But what happened next was unthinkable. Hello, my dear listeners. Before I begin my story, I would be very happy if you subscribe and hit the like button. Please write in the comments which city or country you are listening from. Now enjoy the story. The cold did not arrive quietly. It came with sharp wind, heavy rain, and a silence that felt heavier than noise. I had lived through many winters in my life, but that night felt different, like something was about to break, and once broken, it would never return to the way it was. My name is Lillian Moore. I was standing in my own kitchen, watching the clock on the wall tick forward. My hands moved slower than they used to. Age does that to you? The pot on the stove was still warm, the smell of food filling the room. I told myself I was only a few minutes late. Only a few minutes. That was all it took. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy, impatient. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Anthony Moore, my son. "Where's my food?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it was tight, controlled. That kind of tone carries more danger than shouting. I felt my shoulders tense. "I'm bringing it," I said gently. "Just give me a moment." A moment. That word made him angry. Before I could set the plate on the table, he pushed past me. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Rain hit the windows harder, like it was listening. "You always do this," he said. "I work all day, and you can't even do this one thing right." I looked at him then. Really looked. This was not the little boy who used to fall asleep on my chest. This was a grown man with cold eyes and clenched fists. Still, my voice stayed soft. Mothers learn that softness early. "I didn't mean to be late," I said. "My hands were shaking today." That's when it happened. He grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to leave marks, but hard enough to make his point. He walked me straight to the front door. I barely had time to grab my sweater. "Get out," he said. I laughed at first. A nervous sound. "Anthony, it's raining." He opened the door anyway. Cold air rushed in. Rain sprayed across my face and arms. The night smelled like wet concrete and broken comfort. I said, "Get out." I stepped onto the porch, my heart pounding. I waited for him to stop, for him to say he didn't mean it. Instead, he slammed the door. The lock turned. I stood there frozen, not just from the weather, but from the truth settling into my bones. Water soaked through my clothes. My shoes filled with rain. My hands trembled so badly I had to press them together. I knocked once, then again. No answer. The rain kept falling. The wind kept pushing. And something inside me quietly whispered, "This is only the beginning." The rain did not slow down. If anything, it grew heavier, colder, more determined, like it had decided I would not be spared that night. Water ran down my neck, soaked into my sweater, and settled deep into my bones. I hugged my arms around myself, trying to hold on to whatever warmth I had left. I stood there longer than I should have. That's something elders do sometimes. We wait, even when we shouldn't. I kept looking at the door, half expecting it to open. I imagined Anthony standing there rubbing his face, saying he went too far. I imagined him saying, "Come back inside, Mama." But imagination does not open doors. Reality does something else. It teaches. My knees began to ache. A sharp pain moved up my legs, settling in my lower back. My breath came out in uneven bursts. I realized then that staying would be dangerous. So I turned away. Each step down the porch felt like a small goodbye. The street looked empty, washed clean by rain, shining under the weak yellow streetlight. Wind pushed against me, making walking harder. My shoes slipped slightly on the wet pavement. I took one step, then another. My hands were numb. I could barely feel my fingers around the strap of my purse. My head felt light, like it wasn't fully connected to my body anymore. Still, I kept moving. Because when you've lived a long life, you learn one thing. Stopping is not always an option. By the time I reached the corner, my body began to shake uncontrollably. Not just from cold, but from something deeper. My chest felt tight. My thoughts blurred. I leaned against a pole, trying to steady myself. That's when I saw the headlights. A taxi slowed down. The driver rolled the window halfway and looked at me with concern. "Ma'am?" he said. "You need help?" I tried to answer quickly, but my voice came out thin and weak. "Hospital," I whispered. He didn't ask questions. He got out, opened the back door, and helped me inside. The warmth of the car hit me all at once, making the shaking worse instead of better. Sometimes warmth reminds your body how cold it truly is. As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time. Lights were on. Curtains closed. Life inside continued without me. The ride felt long, even though it wasn't. My teeth chattered. My head throbbed. I pressed my hands together, praying quietly, not for answers, but for strength. By the time we reached the hospital entrance, I could barely stand. Bright lights, sliding doors, voices calling for help. Hands reached for me. Someone wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. Another voice asked my name. "Lillian Moore," I said, though it felt like saying it through water. They moved fast, but gently. My temperature was high. My breathing was shallow. A nurse held my hand while another checked my vitals. "You're safe now," one of them said. Safe. That word settled into me slowly. As they wheeled me down the hallway, the rain faded into the background. Machines beeped softly. The smell of clean sheets and medicine filled the air. I stared at the ceiling lights passing above me one by one. And in that quiet moment, between sickness and shelter, a painful truth became clear. What happened tonight was not an accident. It was a warning. And lying there, shivering under hospital blankets, I felt something new rise inside me. Not anger, not hate, but clarity. The hospital room was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that makes you hear your own thoughts too clearly. I lay there under thin white blankets, my body aching in places I didn't know could ache. My head felt heavy. Every breath burned just a little as it went in and out. A soft machine beside the bed made steady sounds, reminding me that my body needed help to do what it used to do on its own. A nurse came in and checked my temperature. "You have a high fever," she said gently. "Your body took a hard hit tonight." I nodded slowly. Talking felt like work. She tucked the blanket around my shoulders. Her hands were warm, careful. That small kindness almost made me cry. I turned my face slightly so she wouldn't see my eyes filling. When she left, the room fell quiet again. That's when memories began to rise. Not all at once, but slowly, like waves. I saw Anthony as a child, sitting at the kitchen table, swinging his legs because they couldn't reach the floor. I remembered how he used to wait for me to taste the food first, just to be sure it was good. I remembered the way he called me Mama back then, soft and trusting. Somewhere along the way, that voice had changed. I shifted slightly in bed and felt a sharp pain in my back. I closed my eyes and took a careful breath. My body was weak, but my mind was awake. More awake than it had been in years. And that's when the thought came. Clear, quiet, unavoidable. I had been living like a guest in my own home. Not because the house wasn't mine, but because I had allowed someone else to decide my worth. That realization didn't make my heart race. It didn't make me angry. It made me still. There's a kind of stillness that comes when you finally see the truth, without excuses. A doctor came in later and spoke in a calm, steady voice. He explained my condition, the fever, the risk of staying out in the cold rain for too long. He said I was lucky someone brought me in when they did. Lucky. That word sat with me. If I hadn't left when I did, if I had waited longer outside that door. I didn't finish the thought. After he left, I reached for my phone. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked it. I stared at the screen for a long moment before scrolling through my contacts. There was one name I hadn't called in years. My family lawyer. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I never thought I'd need him again. Everything had already been arranged long ago. The house, the accounts, the future, or so I thought. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the name. This wasn't about punishment. This was about protection. I pressed call. As the phone rang, I looked out the small window beside my bed. The rain had slowed, leaving thin trails on the glass. The storm was passing. But something else was just beginning. When the call connected, I spoke softly but clearly. "This is Lillian Moore," I said. "I need to make some changes." There was a pause on the other end, then a respectful tone. "Of course," he said. "We can discuss everything." I closed my eyes. For the first time that night, my breathing steadied. Because I finally understood, strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a quiet decision made in a hospital bed. Morning light crept into the hospital room slowly. It didn't rush in. It didn't demand attention. It just arrived, soft and pale, like it understood that I needed gentleness. I opened my eyes and for a moment, I forgot where I was. Then the steady hum of machines reminded me. My body still felt heavy, but the sharpness from the night before had eased just a little. The fever was still there, but it no longer felt like it was winning. A nurse came in with a small smile. "You rested," she said. "That's good." Rest? I hadn't realized how long it had been since I truly rested. Later that morning, my family lawyer arrived. He sat in the chair beside my bed, not rushing, not filling the room with unnecessary words. He had always been that way, calm, respectful, patient. We talked slowly. I explained what happened. Not with drama, not with anger, just facts. Each word felt heavy, but also freeing. As I spoke, I noticed something strange. My hands stopped shaking. He listened carefully, nodding from time to time. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds. "Lillian," he said gently, "you have every right to protect yourself." Those words settled deep in my chest. We went over everything: my house, my bank accounts, my future plans, things I had set up years ago believing they would bring peace. Instead, they had become tools of control in the wrong hands. I didn't rush my decisions. Age teaches you that haste often leads to regret. I asked questions. I listened. I thought carefully. Each choice was made with clarity, not fear. By the end of our conversation, the path ahead felt firm under my feet. When he stood to leave, he said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes love means stepping back." After he left, I leaned back against the pillows and let that sink in. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The world looked washed clean. But inside me, there was no illusion of peace yet. I knew what would come next. Anthony would find out, and when he did, he would not stay quiet. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then again. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, but because I needed space. Healing requires silence sometimes. As evening fell, I watched shadows stretch across the walls. My body still needed rest, but my mind stayed alert. I could feel something building like distant thunder. This chapter of my life was shifting, and I knew, deep in my bones, that the next steps would test me in ways I had never been tested before. The phone kept buzzing. It sat on the small table beside my bed, lighting up the room again and again. I didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. A mother knows, even when she doesn't want to. I let it ring. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared about the right thing. My body still felt weak, but my mind was steady. The doctor had said I needed rest. That stress would slow my recovery. I listened. For the first time in a long while, I listened to what my body was asking of me. That evening, a message came through. "I know what you did." Just those words. No greeting. No concern. No question about my health. I read it once. Then I set the phone down. Later that night, another message arrived. "You can't do this to me." That sentence made me exhale slowly. I realized something important then. Anthony wasn't worried about me. He was worried about what he thought was his. The next morning, my doctor came in and said I was improving, but I would need time. Time to heal. Time to regain strength. Time to stay warm and safe. Safe. That word followed me. When I was discharged, I didn't go back to the house. I went somewhere quiet, somewhere temporary, where I could breathe without fear of raised voices or slammed doors. The place was small, but it felt peaceful. The silence helped me think. Days passed. My fever faded. My strength returned slowly, like sunlight after a long winter. During that time, Anthony tried everything. Calls, messages, voicemails that shifted in tone. At first, he was angry, then defensive, then desperate. One message stood out. "You're embarrassing me." I closed my eyes when I read it. Not, "I'm sorry," Not I hurt you, just embarrassment. That's when I understood the depth of the problem. A few days later, official papers were delivered to me. I held them carefully, my hand steady. The words were clear, formal, cold. Anthony was taking me to court. He claimed I was confused, that I didn't understand my own decisions, that I was no longer capable of managing my affairs. I sat with those papers for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Calm, because the truth doesn't need to be loud to be strong. And I had the truth on my side. The papers lay on the table for a long time before I touched them again. Court dates. Formal language. Cold words that tried to turn my life into a question mark. I read everything slowly. Age has taught me that speed is not strength. Care is. Anthony was saying I didn't know what I was doing. That I was confused. That someone must have influenced me. He wanted the court to believe I could no longer think clearly. I smiled, just a little. Because confusion looks very different from clarity. I called my lawyer again. My voice was calm, steady. I told him I was ready. Not eager. Not angry. Just ready. We met a few days later. He brought a folder, thick and heavy, and placed it gently on the table between us. We prepare, he said. Quietly, properly. That word, quietly, meant everything to me. Over the next weeks, I gathered what mattered. Medical records showing my condition that night. Doctor notes explaining the fever, the exposure, the risk. Messages from Anthony, short, sharp, revealing more than he realized. And then there was the footage. I hadn't even remembered it at first. The small camera near the front door. Installed years ago for safety. Forgotten because life had felt familiar, safe, until it wasn't. My lawyer played the clip. I watched myself standing there, small, slow, wrapped in a thin sweater. I watched Anthony open the door. I watched his body block the doorway. I watched the rain hit my face. And then the door closing. The sound echoed in the room. I didn't flinch. I had already lived that moment. Seeing it again didn't hurt the way I thought it might. Instead, it confirmed what my heart already knew. This was not confusion. This was reality. As the court date approached, I focused on my health. I ate slowly, I rested. I walked a little each day, feeling my strength return step by step. People my age know something younger folks often forget. You don't need to rush toward justice. Justice arrives when truth is ready. The night before the hearing, I sat by the window, watching the city lights. I felt no fear, only a quiet resolve. I wasn't going to fight my son. I was going to tell the truth. And truth has a way of standing on its own. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not because of the air, but because of the distance between people. Wooden benches. High ceilings. Quiet voices echoing like they didn't belong to anyone. I walked in slowly, my steps measured, my back straight. I did not rush. Rushing gives fear a place to sit. Anthony was already there. He avoided my eyes at first. When he finally looked at me, his face was tight, guarded. Not worried about me, worried about the outcome. I took my seat and folded my hands in my lap. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. And just like that, my private pain became public words. Anthony's lawyer spoke first. He used smooth sentences and careful tones. He said I was elderly. He said grief, illness, and age had clouded my thinking. He said I had made decisions I didn't fully understand. I listened quietly, because when someone is speaking about you without knowing you, silence becomes a kind of strength. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. I felt every year in my knees, but also every year of wisdom in my chest. I looked at the judge. I spoke clearly. My name is Lillian Moore, I said. I know exactly what I did and I know why. The room grew still. I explained the night calmly. No exaggeration. No raised voice. Just truth. The rain, the cold. The door, the hospital. The fever. Each detail placed gently like stones forming a clear path. Then my lawyer presented the evidence. The medical reports. The doctor's notes. The messages. And finally, the footage. The screen lit up. I heard the rain again. I saw myself again. No words were needed. The judge watched closely. Anthony shifted in his seat. The room stayed silent as the door closed on the screen, just as it had that night. When the video ended, something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. The judge leaned forward slightly. His voice when he spoke was firm and steady. "This court finds no evidence of mental instability," he said. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. He continued, explaining that my decisions were lawful, informed, and justified. He spoke about responsibility, about respect, about boundaries. Then he said the words Anthony didn't expect to hear. The house and accounts were mine. Fully, legally, without question. And Anthony was ordered to leave the house. I didn't look at him then. I didn't need to, because the truth had already done the looking for me. When the courtroom emptied, the noise followed everyone else out. What remained was a quiet that felt earned. I gathered my things slowly. No rush, no victory smile. Just a steady breath moving in and out. Outside, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Not because everything was fixed, but because the weight of doubt had been lifted. Anthony walked past me without a word. His shoulders were stiff, his steps quick. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in body, but in spirit. I felt a tug in my chest, the old habit of reaching out, of fixing, of smoothing things over. I let it pass. Boundaries begin in moments like that. I returned to the house later that day with my lawyer. The front door opened easily now. No tension in the handle. No raised voices waiting inside. Just rooms filled with familiar light and quiet dust. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. This place had held decades of my life. Birthdays, late-night talks, early morning prayers. Walking back in felt like greeting an old friend who had been hurt and was finally ready to heal. We walked through each room. Nothing dramatic. Just confirmation, paperwork, keys, responsibility returned to its rightful place. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table alone. The clock ticked. The stove was cold. I made a simple meal and ate slowly, listening to the sounds of the house. For the first time in a long while, there was no tension hiding behind the walls. Days passed. Neighbors checked in. Friends called. I answered when I was ready. I spoke honestly but gently. I didn't explain more than needed. Peace doesn't require long speeches. One afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I knew who it was before opening. Anthony stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. The anger was gone. In its place was something quieter. He didn't step forward. He waited. "I'm sorry," he said. Just that. No excuses, no demands. I listened. I nodded once. Forgiveness is not a door you throw open. It's a window you crack slowly. "I forgive you," I said. "But things will be different." He nodded. He understood. Or at least he was beginning to. When he left, I closed the door gently. Not in fear. Not in anger. In care for myself. That night, as I turned off the lights and settled into bed, I felt something new. Not triumph. Not sadness. Peace. And peace, I've learned, is not the absence of trouble. It's the presence of wisdom. Mornings became quiet again. Not the empty kind. The settled kind. I woke up early, as I always had. But now there was no tension pulling me out of bed. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, touching the floor softly. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, listening to the house breathe. I made my tea slowly. No one rushing me. No voice behind me counting minutes. I began to notice small things again. The sound of the kettle. The way the floor creaked near the window. The comfort of moving at my own pace. These weren't new things. They were things I had lost without realizing it. I set boundaries gently. Anthony did not come inside the house anymore. When we spoke, it was on the phone, and only when I felt ready. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself over and over. I simply lived. That, I learned, is a powerful statement. Some afternoons, I sat on the porch wrapped in a light sweater, watching neighbors walk by. A few stopped to talk. They didn't ask questions the way people sometimes do, curious, searching for drama. They spoke to me like someone who had weathered a storm and come through, with her dignity intact. One evening, Anthony called. His voice was quieter than before, careful. "I'm trying to do better," he said. I listened. I always listen. "I hope you do," I replied. "For your own sake." There was a pause. Then he thanked me. Not for money, not for a house, for honesty. When the call ended, I sat for a long time, thinking about how love changes as we age. It stops being about sacrifice at any cost. It becomes about balance, about knowing where you end and someone else begins. I wrote things down in a small notebook. Reminders, lessons, promises to myself. One line stood out when I read it back later. Peace grows when you protect it. That night, as I turned off the lights, I felt steady. Not healed completely, but healing. And I knew something important. The hardest part was behind me. What remained was wisdom and the responsibility to live by it. Anthony came back into my life quietly, not with noise, not with demands. He asked if we could talk. Just talk, no arguments, no expectations. I told him we could meet in a public place, daytime, neutral ground. That decision mattered. We sat across from each other at a small cafe. Sunlight streamed through the windows. People moved around us, living their ordinary lives. I liked that. It reminded me that our pain was not the center of the world. Anthony looked different. Not changed completely, but softened. His shoulders were less tense. His voice didn't rush ahead of his thoughts. "I've been thinking," he said, "about that night." I waited. Silence gives people room to tell the truth. He spoke about pressure, about anger, about how he thought everything was already his. He didn't say it proudly. He said it like someone finally hearing himself out loud. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I spoke slowly. "Thinking is good," I said, "but thinking alone doesn't fix what was broken." He nodded. I told him about boundaries, not as punishment, but as structure. About how respect must come before closeness. About how love cannot survive where fear lives. He didn't argue. That was new. When we stood to leave, he thanked me again. Not for forgiving him, but for being clear. I walked home feeling steady. Later that night, sitting in my living room, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't waiting for him to change anymore. I was living my life as it was, and that I knew was real freedom. Time has a way of smoothing sharp edges, not by erasing what happened, but by teaching you how to carry it without bleeding. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted quietly, like they always do, whether we are ready or not. My life found a new rhythm. I woke when my body told me to. I ate when I was hungry. I rested without guilt. These sound like small things, but they are not. For many years, I had lived on someone else's schedule, someone else's moods, someone else's expectations. Now the days belonged to me. Anthony stayed at a distance. Not cold, not angry, just respectful. When we spoke, it was brief and careful. He listened more than he talked. I could see effort in him. Real effort. Not perfect, but honest. One afternoon, he came by to pick up a box of his old things. We stood in the doorway, the same doorway that once held fear and rain. This time there was sunlight. "I understand now," he said quietly. "Why you did what you did." I looked at him closely. Not like a mother looking at a child, but like one adult seeing another clearly. "I hope you do," I said. "Understanding is the beginning, not the end." He nodded and left without argument. That moment stayed with me, because forgiveness does not mean returning to the past. It means releasing it. In the evenings, I often sat by the window, watching the sky change colors. I thought about all the years I had spent putting myself last. I didn't feel regret. Regret wastes energy. I felt gratitude for having the chance to choose differently now. My body felt stronger, my breath steadier, my sleep deeper. Peace had moved in, and peace once welcomed rearranges everything. There comes a time in life when looking back no longer hurts. You don't forget. You don't erase. You simply understand. I sit in my living room now, wrapped in a soft blanket, sunlight resting gently on the floor. Outside, the world moves the way it always has. Cars passing, birds calling, life continuing without asking permission. Inside, I am still, not lonely, not waiting, just present. When I think about that winter night, the rain, the cold, the door closing, I no longer feel the sharp ache I once did. What I feel is clarity. That night showed me something I needed to see, even though it came wrapped in pain. It showed me that love without respect becomes heavy, that silence can protect. That age does not make you weak, it makes you precise. Anthony and I speak sometimes, carefully, kindly, with space between us. That space is not emptiness. It is health. It is understanding earned the hard way. I forgave him, not to restore the past, but to free my future. And I forgave myself too, for staying quiet too long, for thinking endurance was the same as love, for forgetting that my life still mattered. Now my days move gently. I cook when I want. I rest when I need. I say no without explaining myself. I say yes only when it feels right in my bones. This is what wisdom looks like at this age. Not loud lessons. Not dramatic endings. Just knowing your worth and living in a way that honors it. If there is one truth I hold close now, it is this. You are never too old to choose peace. And peace, once chosen, will guard you better than anything else ever could.